Who is better, Joe or Jerry? Because that's what we're really talking about here. This is a two-man race, Joe or Jerry.
Lott's number 3, and Joe and Jerry are the final 2. Who's number 1? Who's number 2?
49ers Mount Rushmore. What do you got, Larry?
Oh, somebody had this week, and so it's the obvious. It's Montana Young.
This is Dan's. Dan loves this.
No. It wasn't Dan. It was it could have been Dan. It was I saw it online, but it was Montana Young, Rice, and Lott. And I thought to myself, yeah, there's no doubt that's their Mount Rushmore right there. And I was thinking, the guys who are for sure are Montana and Rice. The guys who are, a little bit less sure would be Ronnie and Steve. But I think they've got the right 4, and I don't think you could really debate that too much. There's other guys who are great. There also was a NFL Network show this weekend, and I saw it last night. I taped it. Top 10 49ers of all time. And they're doing this of all, top 10 Eagles, top 10 Seahawks, top 10, they get an hour for everything. So have you seen the top 10 49er list of all time?
No. And by the way, there's a lot of people saying that on your, you got to get your, Bill Walsh on your Mount Rushmore. That's obviously, we're not including coaches here. It's players.
Yeah. I mean, that's the thing. I mean, where's Walsh? And then, there's no T.O. T.O.'s pretty freaking great. But then he played half his career elsewhere. I think of Bryant Young. Was Bryant Young as good a defensive tackle as Steve Young was a quarterback?
Right.
I don't know. They're
Here's
both
the
Hall
deal.
of Famers.
So Frank Gore run for more yards than anyone else in a 49ers uniform. But I'm going to tell you right now, Christian McCaffrey's a better football player than Frank Gore ever was. So,
and not to mention Roger Craig.
Not to mention a guy named Roger Craig.
So this is the top 10 Niners as they had him on the show.
All time.
All time. This is all time. All time. Do you want me to go from 10 to 1 or 1 to 10?
No, go from 10 to 1.
Top 10 49ers of all time. Number 10, Frank Gore. Number 9, Charles Haley. Number 8, Dwight Clark. Number 7, Roger Craig. Number 6, Patrick Willis. Number 5, Steve Young. Number 4, instead of going with one guy, they went with 4 guys. They went with Y.A. Tittle.
List is bullshit right there. You can't have 14 guys in your top 10. Get the fuck out of here, list.
Yeah, $1 million backfield is listed as number 4 with Y.A. Tittle, Joe the Jet Perry, Hugh McElhaney, John Henry Johnson.
Yeah.
All 4 of those guys were Hall of Famers.
Sure.
They put them in there as 1 at number 4.
No.
So we know number 3, number 2, and number 1. We know who they are. It's just a matter of order. How would you have 1, 2, and 3 greatest Niners of all time?
Well,
because this is debatable. This is a little bit debatable, to be completely honest.
So look, I've asked guys who have been, 49ers season ticket holders forever, guys whose sports opinions I really, really care about, about who is better, Joe or Jerry, because that's what we're really talking about here. This is a two-man race, Joe or Jerry.
Lott's number 3, and Joe and Jerry are the final 2. Who's number 1? Who's number 2?
Has the myth of Joe Montana dwarf the reality that we got this wrong? Because Jerry Rice is arguably pound for pound the single greatest, most productive player in the history of the sport, right? No one was ever better at any position than Jerry Rice was at wide receiver. Maybe Lawrence Taylor at outside linebacker, maybe.
No, but I mean, Jerry is definitely the number 1 wide receiver.
Right. And you could argue that blips of Randy Moss's career were better than any one single season that Jerry might have had. But again, Jerry's numbers still so thoroughly outpace the rest of football history as all of the league has bent to the benefit of catching up with Jerry Rice for wide receivers that are behind him. None of them are even in shouting distance of the guy. So he is so far and away, pound for pound, the greatest wide receiver ever. No one's even come close, that I don't think that there's much to debate. Having said that, I think Joe Montana is probably the greatest 49er of all time. And it's not just
it's Joe Montana.
It's not just my nostalgia that does that. He won under any and all conditions. Like, however he had to go about winning that game, that's what Joe Montana would do. Where things needed to be right for Steve to really win every game that was a big game he was in, where Joe could make Shinola out of total shit. And he did in that, in the classic, the catch to Dwight Clark. Joe Montana sucked that day.
I mean, Joe was Joe before Joe was Joe. I mean, and this was a debate that happened a lot when he played, because Walsh was so great. Did Walsh make Joe? Did Joe make Walsh? And there were people that would make their arguments on both sides. Well,
hey, we did it again with
Walsh. Had a nice career, but Joe Montana was Joe Montana before he was a 49er, and Joe Montana was Joe Montana after he was a 49er. And so Joe was the comeback kid at Notre Dame. Joe was, a great player at Ringo High School. Joe was awesome. And the Niners had Steve DeBerg. DeBerg had an awesome arm. He was a huge guy with an incredible arm. But they didn't become the Niners until Joe. And then he went to Kansas City and he beat the Niners, and he went to Kansas City, almost took them to the Super Bowl. Joe Montana, was the difference. I mean, Walsh had a great offense. Walsh was a terrific coach, taking nothing away from Walsh. Walsh's tree is the best. He's one of the greatest coaches in the history of the NFL. But if you had to argue, one made the other. I'll argue that Joe made Walsh more than Walsh made Joe. It's Ronnie's 3, Jerry's 2, Joe's 1. And I understand that. I mean, I guess the argument they gave in the show was that, Joe, the Niners were terrible before Joe, and that he was there for 2 Super Bowls before Rice. And, he was making Freddie Solomon and Dwight Clark look awesome. And Dwight was leading the NFL in receptions before Jerry and this and that. So they're arguing that Joe means more than Jerry. I mean, Jerry is considered a better wide receiver than Joe is a quarterback. Like, Jerry's the undoubted number 1 wide receiver. It goes Jerry, then Moss, then Owens, in that order, where a lot of people will put Brady in front of Joe, and just on longevity. And I would too. I mean, come on. I mean, seriously. And I love Joe, and I lived it, but still,
right. Well, I mean,
Brady, the longevity of Brady has to be respected.
You can't evaluate Joe Montana just through his statistics either, or else he's, there's not a lot to buoy. He's the best of all time, just looking at his numbers, because the game has changed so much. So Joe lived in a world that no longer even exists on a football field, and he thrived in it. But he thrived in it in a way that his numbers are still depressed based on the way that the game was played, the way that Bill Walsh called a game, and the way that the game is played now. It's all changed so dramatically. Thanks for watching. Tune into the Damon Bruce Show live on YouTube every weekday at 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific.